time to get over it. Every black person in America carries survivor's remorse on their shoulders. We have to be martyrs for our humanity, and that's an oxymoron. They don't hear the trees in the forest giving them life, and they don't hear when we fall. They don't hear us at all. But we are perseverers, continuers, emergers from ash and rubble, builders of shuttles, real subtle combatant soldiers. We need not our life saved, we are type brave, and after all, it is a light day. And I like to believe that we're still dreaming, still loving, still scheming for dough. The working man is still the toughest I know. The tender moments that our women tend to decorate time with, that's what I want to decorate lines with. Explore the here and after on a raft in the aftermath with laughter. My soul resists capture an event of all disaster, eventually even escaping me, the race to no end. So far crying has been what sent me in my body again. But dig it, I'm still dreaming. Jefferson loved to chill with her loved ones. Her nephew loved to play video games, so from time to time she did too.
Both of John would go to work and then relax in his living room.
Sandra Bland minded her business, cigarettes calmed her down. But we're the dangerous ones. That's why they invade us, because they're afraid of the neighborhoods they built as free-range cages for us. Irony, you evaded the bulk of the war that you created within our part of town by the time that you face us. We already know that not every score gets settled, not every settlement pays, not every drug gets peddled, not every government aids. It's safe to say we know the effect on us, we know there's no effect on you. I hope you're well, I like to do a wellness check on you. Second thought, healing is not about letting things slide or persecutors get off scot-free. It's about seeing enough loss in your life to know that you want peace. Forgiving yourself when you don't believe that you're the one who can achieve it. Walking away with a greater capacity for happiness, letting go of the past, perceiving the future, and then attempting to put a dent into all the great getting after of it. On a path we invent, being sad isn't the end. You see, I like to believe that we're still dreaming, still loving, still scheming for dough. The working man is still the toughest I know. The tender moments that our women tend to decorate time with, that's what I want to decorate lines with. Explore the here and after on a raft in the aftermath with laughter. My soul resists capture an event of all disaster, eventually even escaping me the race to no end. So far crying has been what sent me in my body again. But dig it, I'm still dreaming.
It's still a lot of debate about who we are. Cats arguing, we ain't African, we ain't black, we ain't this, we ain't that. Man, truth is, we all of that. Cause all of that come from us, you know what I'm saying? It's all about where you gon' fit in. Chill. Yo, what's your name? You an African, an American, or an Israelite? Black or more, Muhammad or a provocateur, what the business like? Your Malcolm X by any means. Chief Turner, Dr. King, Keeper Burner, UP. Look at me, who you see, I'm garbage. When I rap a bar, every line is a blacker star. I'm masterful cause I understand who these crackers are. Nat Turner's my avatar, my attitude so desolate. I'm a mocking dog, these motherfuckers. Dr. Copy, these Europeans, know what I mean? I'm Farrakhan, never will I run. Robert Williams, nigga with a gun. George and Jonathan Jackson, Dr. Joseph Ben, Yakinan. Show and prove like Dr. Clark. I'm a boom cause I got the heart. I'm New York cause I'm hella smart. I'm Denzel cause I got the part. I'm Bianchi, Sutton Khufu, Mansa Musa, Shaka Zulu. I'm a Mia, I'm a Tulu. If I was Jesus, what would you do? I'm a Negro and I'm colored. I'm your nigga and your brother. Yeah, I kill you, but I love you. Accept your own and reject the other. What's your name?
What's your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where is your history? How did the man wipe out your history? How did the man, what did the man do to make you a dumb?
What's your name? It's a Chigaboo, it's a Porsche monkey, it's a Sambo. It's a yo-yo, maybe revolution is just too much for the handle. I ain't carry no scandal. I ain't scary, I am. Carried up with a candle. Time to pick up the mantle. I'm a son to Wap and Queen of Zika. Nefertiti and Queen Amina. Hashtasset and the Queen of Sheba. She thinks she God, please believe her. Name is Osada, great escape. Angela Davis, peace safe. Winning that devil with peace break. I'm animate, refuse to hate. I see straight through cause I'm late today. Been standing loop, I had things to say. It's true, tears of my paved the way. The homie queen, Came to slay, better shit bottom. I mean my Malcolm, black love is the only outcome. I won't stop until y'all have some. I might say this shit gon' happen. I'm gonna shoot, I'm blessed altar. I'm maybe I bless the Walter. I'm all the cool lodge, I'm my daughter. I'm warrior, I cannot falter. I'm the one to give birth to stars. Masterful, how work these bars. Serious beat to the earth to Mars. KOS, reverse the stars. Show that.
What's your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where is your history? How did the man wipe out your history? How did the man, what did the man do to make you as dumb as you are right now?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for this webinar on police divestment in Fort Worth. We're excited to talk to you. My name is Jen Sardoui. I am organized with Rebirth Equity Alliance. And the speakers that you'll hear from tonight are from a variety of Fort Worth-based organizations, and we're all really excited to share information and work together to make our community safer and be more holistic in how we think about our safety. Do you want to, everyone, if you'll unmute and come on video and introduce yourself and just like your name and organization, that would be really great.
I'll go first. What's up, guys? I'm Nice, and I am from Enough is Enough Fort Worth, and I'm happy to be here. Hope you guys take in a lot, and make sure you pay attention and take note.
Hey everybody, my name is Pamela Young, and I'm an organizer with United Fort Worth, and I am excited about this presentation and hope everyone is able to walk away with something that they didn't have before. Thanks.
Richard, why don't you go next?
Sure. I'm Richard. I'm organizer with the Campaign to Fight Toxic Prisons. We're a national organization, but I live here in Fort Worth, or the so-called Fort Worth, and I work with lots of different groups and organizers to make real effective changes in our communities.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Chris Harris. I'm with Texas Appleseed. I'm actually based out of Austin and do a lot of policing and decarceration work here. And just want to thank everybody behind the scenes as well who's holding it down and making this thing go.
Lizzie?
Hi, I'm Lizzie Maldonado. I organize with OD8, which is a harm reduction and syringe access program in Fort Worth, Texas. I use she or they pronouns, and I'll be talking with you along with Richard about defunding police kind of one-on-one. Awesome.
And Gabriela?
Hi everyone, I'm Gabriela and I'm from Fort Worth. I'm a community activist, so I dip into a little bit of everything. And I'm going to be talking about mental health today and other non-police resources. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. We have a few accommodations today. There is a live transcript of this webinar available. We'll put that link in the chat, both on Facebook and on Zoom. And if you're using this, if you're viewing this webinar in Spanish, there is like Spanish captioning available on Zoom, and that link is in the Facebook comments and on the Zoom comments. So we're so excited to talk to you tonight. We'll get right into it because we did spend a few minutes introing. Our agenda tonight starts with an introduction on like why defund the police. So how did we get to this point? There is a huge like outcry from communities across this nation to defund police, and you're going to hear a little bit more about why. I don't need to tell you that, our speakers will, but we hope that you're already in the mindset of defunding police. Why are our communities over-policed? And if you're already thinking about those things, I'm excited to get more into what we can do together to create safer communities by investing in our communities instead of investing in policing. Lizzie and Richard, I'll let y'all get started and then we'll frame after. Go ahead.
Absolutely, sure. Defunding the police, why now? The solution to or not the solution, the fact of the matter is, it's not a why now situation. It's actually something that's been going on for a really long time. I'm not going to give a full outline on the political and social history of defund movements. We have a Fight Toxic Prisons has a whole workshop dedicated to that. But just to contextualize this, Black and brown people, indigenous people, everybody has been claiming, or not everybody, but there have been strong parts of Black, brown, indigenous, trans, queer communities that have been shouting for defunding. And what I'm more about specifically, abolishing the police since minimum 1960s, maximum since policing started. So that's just kind of the why now. The other parts of the why now is some of the obvious stuff about George Floyd incident of police brutality, what you've seen in the news. But I just wanted to make it really clear from the get-go that defund efforts, and then the stuff that I'm involved with, more specifically abolitionist efforts in terms of creating safer communities that don't require policing at all. It is not a new phenomenon. It is not a new concept. And we owe a great deal of debt to our ancestors in terms of how and when we contextualize that particular piece. But on to like, what does defunding mean? And this is what defunding means to me. I encourage you to think and reflect on what defunding means to you and what it means to your community. A few points that I had just to talk about that. It's part of a larger movement to create safer communities. Lizzie will definitely speak a little bit on what that looks like. For me, policing, or I think not just for me, but policing is often an entryway into the criminal punishment system. So when we talk about, or when I talk about defunding the police, I mean one small step that gets at eliminating and dismantling an entire system predicated on white supremacy. So defund efforts means we want to take looking at what exists, deconstructing it, and then reconstructing it in ways that are helpful and sustainable for our communities. And defunding is also a strategy to end state violence that is often empowered systems of social and political control by those in charge. And lastly, defunding to me means ending a system of mutually reinforcing systems that include cash bails, school resource officers, mass incarceration, the war on drugs, ICE detention centers, and all those parts of the criminal punishment system that disproportionately affects Black, brown, people of color, indigenous folks, trans folks, queer folks, and all those marginalized communities throughout the world. Because the other last bit is defunding isn't just a movement in the United States, it's a global movement.
Richard, it seems like all these systems are working together to harm our communities from what you're saying.
Facts.
Here. Okay. Lizzie, do you want to share?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we're in the moment of this like largest racial justice movement in history that's global and has like united behind calls to defund police, which has gotten a lot of us thinking like, does policing ever keep us safe? Like even without the bad apples and like that sort of framing, does policing as an institution contribute to our public safety or not? We learned that most crime is never reported and most reported crime is never solved. There are tens of thousands of untested rape kits across the country, for example, of evidence of crimes that they're not interested in solving or not that interested in solving. There's also wage theft, which makes up more theft or like the amount of theft than like all of the other categories of theft combined, and they're not really pursuing that sort of crime. So when we started thinking about like, what is crime? What does that mean? It's definitely a construct and something that we frame for ourselves. And we also were understanding, I guess, that policing can only react to crime at its very best. On its best day, it's reacting to crime. It cannot prevent or repair harm in our communities. And on its best day, it's separating, policing as an institution is separating families in our communities from the drug war, which is racist and puts millions of nonviolent people behind bars every year, and through other like broken windows, policing laws, and other things like that, where policing isn't actually contributing to our public safety in any way, but is instead causing all of this harm. I don't think we have as much time to go into like how policing is contributing to mass incarceration, but at least understand that police are the foot soldiers of mass incarceration. They're the first interaction that people have with the system. It's an introduction, like entryway into the criminal punishment system, as Richard mentioned. And right now we have a crisis where police are killing 1,000+ people every year, and fewer than 1% are ever indicted. Those people are disproportionately Black and brown people. There is almost no justice for families who are harmed by police violence. And we're also demanding to defund policing because it's time to reimagine public safety and compare, like, think about the ways that our investments in our communities could change to actually get to the root of harm and the root of violence and that sort of thing. I also just wanted to mention that as we face like the crisis of COVID-19 and we're half the country is unemployed, more people, there's an eviction wave that's impending and that's expected to come. Unemployment benefits are being cut off. We're on the brink of like a major economic event, and part of like understanding how policing is harming us is sort of considering like how the police state could function in like more economic despair, essentially. Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I think something that you mention, like sometimes that really gets me thinking, is that policing is also bad for police. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Suicide is the leading cause of death for police officers in the US. It far outnumbers the number of officers who are killed in the line of duty, actually. But the perception of police is that their job is very dangerous, that they could die any day on the job. There's all this sort of understanding that when police leave the house, their families don't know if they're going to come home again, but a lot of families share that concern. And there's also studies that show they have a domestic violence problem that is outpacing the NFL's domestic violence issue. And that, like, essentially the way that I could like see it, at least, is that police are operating on orders from the state and then often are thrown under the bus as bad apples, and like they go to jail when essentially like the whole institution places them in those heated like circumstances that they shouldn't sort of be in the first place, as well. So sort of considering that like they're not backed by the state when things go wrong, when they have PTSD or when they have like harm in their families or things like that, but they also suffer major health consequences from their job that actually aren't based in like being killed in the line of duty. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important that we like protect the people in our community, and policing like harms everyone all around. I get that. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is opportunities for divestment from policing. Chris?
Sure. Well, there was a few things on the slides here. If Zoe, if you'll actually go back one, that's all right. So, you know, I think part of the question is how do we get over policed? And part of it is that we put everything onto police. We got to this situation where we have so many police and we have so many communities over policed, in part because that's the structure and nature of how it was set up originally, but it's also in part because we've put all the investment in that area and we rely on police to try to do everything in our communities, which not only means that many things get done poorly, but it also means that we're crowding out, and the opportunity cost of investing in police means that we're not investing in these other areas. So looking forward to future conversations, later in this proposal or later in this presentation about alternative investments. But if you see here, there's national analysis, right, of how police spend their time and what 911 calls are like. So even for what police we think of when we think of police, which is rushing into a burglary or a violent problem, it's actually a very small amount of what police even do. So, over the last 30 years, much to many people's surprise, even though I agree 100% that crime is largely a construct and what we should be looking at is harm, even if we look at it through the lens of the state, which is crime, it's plummeted in the last 30 years, but police budgets, the number of police keep going up. And we see that non-criminal calls, things even not about crime, make up a third or more of police calls for service in many cities. We just did this analysis in Austin. It was 2/3 of calls were not about a crime at all that police responded to. Traffic enforcement and responding to accidents, even when there isn't any sort of wrongdoing involved, make up 15+% of police responses in many cities. It was over 20% in Austin. And serious violent crimes make up less than 1% of police calls for service in most cities. If you look over to the right, this is actually not about calls, but about time. And even there, when we look at how much time police are spending on things, violence is less than 4% of the time. So even granting sort of the narrative that that police and police proponents usually give, the numbers don't bear out that they're doing what they say they're doing, or that the need for them is there for what they claim that they're needed for. We can go on to the next one. Yeah, sorry, keep going. Yeah. So how is this over-reliance harmful, right? So this leads to over-policing, which disproportionately affects people of color, specifically Black and Brown Americans. According to a 2018 study, as you can see here, police are twice as likely to use force against people of color, and less than half of Black and Hispanic residents stopped on the street thought that their stops were legitimate, compared to 2/3 of white folks. So we also see the threat of force used against Black and Brown people much more often. And so obviously, we're here because the legitimacy of policing as an institution is now being questioned more broadly. And it was mentioned earlier that these conversations have been going on for a while, and there've been very dedicated abolitionists and people moving to pushing a divest invest framework. But I think it's really coming to the fore now because we see so much more of it, and the legitimacy of policing is really being questioned on a broader scale. Keep going. The other reason that we're looking at divestment to address these issues, or defunding to address these issues, as opposed to other reforms that have traditionally been tried and pushed, is that we've tried them and we've seen that they've often been ineffective, right? So a few really good recent examples. A Black man who actually led the workshop for the implicit bias training in San Jose was shot by a rubber bullet during protests back in June. We've tried training reforms, right? The Atlanta officer who killed Rayshard Brooks had recently done both de-escalation and cultural awareness training. We've tried training, right? And when we talk about policy, what if we ban these different behaviors that police do? Chokeholds have been banned in New York since the 90s, but that didn't stop the police officer who killed Eric Garner. It also didn't mean that he got held accountable for that. He stayed on the force for 5 years, despite the fact that the behavior he'd engaged in was technically against police policy, right? So we see over and over that some of the methods that we've tried in the past have not really moved the needle. And so, we're here now where we're saying, yes, what we actually need to do is look at how do we take the money out of the police department and begin to reinvest in alternative approaches that actually make our community safer, don't risk violence, and don't risk harm. So we can go on to the next one. And the last thing, and it was mentioned earlier, but why now? Obviously, there's just been, all of these recent incidents that have really come to the fore. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, you can see here, centuries of discrimination and racism, decades of over-policing, obviously the increased visibility of it all, and as was mentioned as well, the global pandemic, right? So, which is causing an economic crisis, right? We've got folks out of work, in food lines en masse, and now, right, many more housing insecure and facing evictions. It's really shine a light on the inequities in our society, of which police are often utilized as a means to control. And so it's now people are seeing that and saying, well, how can we reorient our priorities by investing in things that are actually going to alleviate these inequities, actually help support people to have what they need. And so this is why we're here. So we can go on to the next one. I think Robert, you might want to. We're going to talk about this. Well, I can speak to it if Robert or somebody else doesn't want to jump on. This is an issue in many places around the country, and in Texas, very similarly, right? Almost all the major cities are spending a third or more of their budgets on policing. In Austin, where I'm at, it's 40% of the general fund of the budget.
Yeah. I think Pam was going to speak to this.
Okay, great.
Pam?
No, that was Robert. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, so it's over $440 million in Austin, about 40% of the budget. We are very much in the midst of that here. The budget vote in Austin is actually next week. Dallas, it's $800 million. Their budget vote got delayed. They were trying to raise the budget about $6 million for the police, and they were able to force a delay to that vote. So it's been coming up next month. And in San Antonio, it's almost $500 million. And so, again, just city after city, we've taken the approach of, instead of investing in people and investing in health and safety that doesn't risk harm, we've put all of our eggs into the policing basket with negative consequences, because not only are people not getting the type of response they need when they need a response, but they're getting harmed. People are being hurt. And then we're also not investing in housing, in food, in health, and all these other things. So, unfortunately, Fort Worth is not alone in this, but Fort Worth is also not alone in this fight right now. There are organized communities in each one of these cities that is really pushing. So I'm really happy to help support. I'm going to the next one.
All right, thank you for that, Chris. So I'm going to go over a little bit about the City of Fort Worth budget, just a brief overview. I'm going to try to make this as non-boring as I can, but I really want everybody to kind of shift in your mind frame, in your mindset when you're thinking about the budget. A budget, and you may have heard this before, but a budget is a moral document. It tells about what it is that you prioritize, what it is that you hold dear, what it is that you think is important. And so when we look at the city budget, that really tells us what our local government prioritizes and thinks is important. Another thing you want to keep in mind about the city budget is it's your budget. The graph that we're looking at right now is the general fund. So the City of Fort Worth budget is made up of 5 different funds, the general fund being the largest of those funds. Now that general fund is funded by property taxes and sales taxes, okay? And guess who funds property and sales tax? We do. So if you are a homeowner or if you are a business owner, you pay into property taxes. And if you're not one of those, you definitely are a consumer. So you pay into sales tax. So this is our budget. The general fund belongs to us. And so that's why it's really incumbent upon each and every one of us who live in the city of Fort Worth to make sure that we know where our money is going, right? And so if you look at this chart, you'll see automatically right off the bat that the police department is the single largest expenditure in the general fund. They take up almost half, 38%. Over $267 million goes to the police department. And that's not including the almost $80 million that the police department gets a year from the CCPD, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So that's almost $350 million a year for the police department. Now compare that to the other little slivers of color you see on this pie chart, things like parks and recreation, which is about 7%, transportation and public works is about 5%, the library is 3%. Something that's not even mentioned on here is neighborhood services, which is less than 2%. And one of our newest departments, the Department of Diversity and Inclusion, it's almost less than 1%. It's not even $1 million. So that shows you what our city government is prioritizing, because that's where they're putting their resources. And so also, if you look on this chart, there's some red writing there on the left-hand side. So at the beginning of each year, and we'll talk a little bit more about this schedule later in the presentation, but at the beginning of each year, the city staff and city council, they do a forecast, okay, for how much money is going to be spent in each fund. And so what was originally projected for the general fund expenditures was about $773 million, okay? But then of course, the pandemic hit. And so now that expenditure projection has been bumped down to $750 million. So what does that mean? It means that cuts are going to have to be made somewhere, right, in light of the pandemic. So if you go to the next slide, we can begin to look at where some of these cuts are coming from. And this is really going to be comical, but and it was hard for me to believe, but it's in black and white. And if the city is watching, if their numbers are wrong, please tell us. But it looks like $200,000 so far has been cut from economic development, okay? Then you look at Parks and Rec, $4.1 million has been cut from that due to COVID. Transportation and Public Works has almost been cut in half. $32 million has been cut. But when you look at the police department, which is the largest expenditure in the general fund, how much has been cut? $10? $10, y'all. Okay. I couldn't believe it.
It's because we are under the false impression that police are keeping us safe from a global pandemic.
Come on. Exactly. And they're the main ones out here originally who were not wearing masks, by the way. But that's mind-boggling. $10 cut from the largest expenditure. And they just received an extra, what, $1 billion over the next 10 years through the CCPD renewal. So that's wild. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, that's Chris.
Yeah, so
Richard, I'm sorry. Richard got back on. Richard, did you want to circle back to what you were going to talk about in was it initiatives?
Can y'all hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just great.
All right, cool. Yeah, honestly, a few things that I just wanted to point out in terms of what I'm not gonna read everything on that slide, but defunding efforts, as I mentioned when we were talking about generally where does defunding come from. I'll keep this very brief. Basically, a point I wanted to make that I think is important to recognize is that the initiatives that we're taking here in Fort Worth to defund these and to start these conversations are happening throughout the state because the issue is, like as Pamela was pointing out, the fact that so much of our fiscal budget is going to policing under, like you were just saying a second ago, Jen, the false guise that it's keeping us safe. Like brief numbers, $400 million in Austin, which is 40% of their budget, is going to specifically policing. Similar number, $500 million in Dallas. And I think San Antonio, 179 million. So I guess just kind of the key to those numbers is that so much of that money is being invested in policing rather than community programming. And I just wanted to highlight a few things. Grassroots leadership and other organizers, what their defund strategy, because if we're going to work to defund police, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long, intentional process. So Austin has created a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan on how they can steadily reduce the amount of policing.
I think it's
and some other things that Dallas has done with Our City, Our Futures, and other organizations. They created a 10-point platform on what are the different things that they want to do to defund the police. And then how, like Jen, something you mentioned earlier, how that kind of goes with other things that are happening, like with ICE, and then a big thing that's happening in Dallas, anti-poverty programs. So one thing, what it means when we're talking about defunding is how can we provide better resources for our communities, education, and I think Lizzie was talking a little bit about COVID. How can we better provide for people who are unemployed due to COVID?
Yeah, Richard,
all
I
that
think
tax
that,
money
like,
and everything
it's so
is going
important
to policing. Why can't we get it to education and other things that are more important for folks?
Yeah, I think it's so important to note that, like, when we talk about divesting from police, we also talk about investing in our communities. And when, like, so much of our funding is police funding, how can we invest in our communities? So that's really important framing. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, we're going
Yeah,
to...
and the very last thing I wanted to mention just on like the framing, Pam definitely knows way more about the budgetary process than I do for sure, but absolutely. But just in terms of like budgeting, like what's happening in San Antonio, Black Futures Collective, or what other organizers in San Antonio, they're working on creating line item budget items, because that's one thing most people don't know about what happens with these budgets is that there's not a lot of transparency that's going on with budgets. So if something said, if millions of dollars or $400 million, $500 million that's allocated towards police, but then we don't always know what are those things that they're funding with all that $500 million, right? Safety is the general thing. And this is a fight that we're waging, that's waging in different cities in terms of creating better accountability and better transparency. So that's another kind of key aspect of what defund efforts are about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we'll get into that in our next section. So we're going to talk a little bit about alternative investments in community. And this is like a really important part for me. I'll give like a general overview of this section here.
Wait, Jen, we had
there's more, but okay, I'm sorry. I missed that.
Yeah, just really quickly, you know, to the point just raised, you know, there's so much about the budget that can be cut, more than $10. And so these are really just some immediate things that, you know, are parts of the police budget that many cities are looking at as far as areas to cut and things that can be cut. And so I wanted to just briefly go through this. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the difference between the general fund and CCPD, so I won't get too far into that. But things like narcotics units, which are primarily picking up folks for low-level drug enforcement, really small amounts of possession, almost overwhelmingly black and brown folks. And when we know that substance use treatment, harm reduction, these other approaches actually deal with substance use better rather than criminalization, incarceration. There's roughly 60 vacant positions in the Fort Worth Police Department that they haven't filled. These aren't even current personnel. And we estimated somewhere around $3 million that potentially could be saved by simply not removing those positions. Militarized components of the departments like SWAT teams are also areas that many places are looking to cut. You can see in the CCPD budget, they expand the SWAT teams with additional funding. There's vice units and mounted patrols. Mounted patrols we've seen used against protesters in many, many cities, and really not clear what utility they have at all. And so, between these areas, as well as when we look at the CPD, how much of that money goes to put police into schools, to put cameras into neighborhoods, and increase surveillance, things that ultimately are not making us safer, especially compared to the alternative resources, right? Like mental health in schools and other resources that could actually uplift neighborhoods. So I really just wanted to highlight really that there's so much there in these police budgets that can and should be looked at for immediate savings opportunities as cities look to invest and build up alternative approaches to health and safety.
Thank you for that, Chris. You can go to the next slide. All right, so a little bit more on the budget. So City of Fort Worth folks, if you will recall last week, the city manager, David Cook, he did 2 public presentations educating people on the budget, how the budget works, what's in the budget, and so forth. And that's something that we asked for, and we'll get to that in a minute. But David Cook, he said, the budget isn't really about how much money we spend. It's really about what we are getting for the money that we spend. And I agree. I think we all agree. We don't just want to look at dollars and cents. We want to see, what is that money going to? What is it being used for? And what is the return that we're getting for that money? But what we need David Cook and city government to understand, the folks who represent us, is that when we look at the public safety budget, the budget for police being one of the largest expenditures in the budget, we have to ask ourselves, does it really keep us safe? Does it make our community safer? The more that we add to the police, the more police that we hire, the more positions that we fill, does it really equate to less crime? Are people's core needs met? Namely, those core needs that actually end up leading to crime, because we know that poverty is one of the main factors when you're looking at why crime, why violence happens in our communities. So is this budget, is this bloated police budget affecting change in that area? And I think we can start to realize that it's really not. And in a lot of cases, it's actually adding to that violence, it's actually adding to that crime. Also, to David Cook's point here, it's really about what we are getting for the money that we spend. So all that money that we're spending on police, well, we spent some money on a police expert panel, okay? Right after Tatiana Jefferson was murdered by Fort Worth police officer Aaron Dean, we paid them to come in and do an assessment, to begin an assessment of the Fort Worth Police Department. They released their interim report on, I want to say Friday of last week. And we'll share links where you can see that report in the video where they talked about it. But it was a scathing report. It was a report that basically said all the things that y'all are spending money on, like de-escalation training, like the CIT unit that you have, it's ineffectual. It's not working. Your policies say one thing, but the officers who are out on the street aren't putting that into practice. And so, again, we're spending a lot of money, but we're not getting the results that we say that we want to get. And so we have to begin to reevaluate, reimagine public safety. And so let's see, you can go to the next slide, I think. Yes. So I'm sorry, just before we get to that. So some of those core needs, just to run through them, and Lizzie may have already touched on them, but things that actually do keep us safe are things like food security, affordable housing, living wage jobs, public transportation, like robust, real public transportation that gets to folks who need it the most. Neighborhood beautification and amenities, recreation, education, healthcare, basically all of the things that are available in the white suburbs in most cities and towns. Those are the things that we need to have real public safety in all of our neighborhoods, because we all deserve that. And that doesn't come from more police, but it comes from more resources. Okay, you can go to the next slide. All right, so again, we talked about the general fund, and what is not included in that general fund is even more funding for the police. About $80 million a year goes to the CCPD, or the Crime Prevention and Control District. I'm not gonna go through the history on that because I'm sure many of you have heard it. And if not, again, the link, we're gonna share a link for that at the end of this presentation. But basically in July, on July 14th, there was an election. Every 5 years, there is an election to renew the CCPD. This year, that election was actually to renew it for 10 years. And so the proposition passed, Proposition A passed. Thank you to everybody who got out there and fought to see that it didn't pass, but it actually did pass. And so we'll have a whole another 10 years of funding for the Crime Prevention and Control District. And what that equates to is Fort Worth spending about $1 million per day on policing, and creating, again, a $1 billion tax burden on the people. This is from a sales tax. This is a half-cent sales tax that most cities use on transportation, but we're using it on police funding. And the majority of this fund is spent to militarize the police, to weaponize the police, to enhance, and you can go to the next slide, the police power in our neighborhoods. One thing I do want to say about the CCPD election is, even though folks who are justice-minded may feel like they lost, we know that typically in those CCPD elections, the opposition vote rounds out to about 3,000 at its highest. This year, we pulled almost 19,000 opposition votes. So please give yourself a hand. I feel like that was definitely a win. Even though we lost the battle, that was a win because we created a lot of education and awareness about this fund, so that now we really know what's in it. So we're looking at a graph that shows us how funds are being prioritized for CCPD. And you can see, again, almost half is going to equipment, tech, infrastructure, and then enforced enhancement. Enforced enhancement includes expanded SWAT, mounted patrol, school resource officers, police in our schools with our children, enhanced criminal tracking, special response team, SRT, and equipment and technology. These are more ways for everyday residents to be surveilled by the police, license plate readers. And then also, if you'll look at the green area there, is 6% is going to partners with a shared mission. Partners with a shared mission is the part of this fund that actually goes to preventing crime, that actually goes to preventing violence. It's not a afterthought. It's not a crime control, in other words. And so these are the programs that we actually want to fund. Things like community-based programs, Family Justice Center or One Safe Place. Also things like domestic violence prevention programs like Cheryl's Voice. Those are things that we actually want to fund, but they're only getting 6% of $80 million a year. Again, that's unacceptable. And so let's go to the next slide. All right, so how can we affect change in the CCPD? Number one, you can attend the meetings. And I know that there's been some confusion over whether or not those meetings are public. They are, they have always been. And so go to them. You can watch them online, or you can go in person if COVID permits. Not only are they open to the public, but you can make public comments. You can sign up on the agenda to make comments just like you do for a city council meeting. So please go to these meetings, find out where this money is going, make comments, make suggestions as to where you want the money to go. And also apply if you have a program that would go toward, preventing violence and crime in our community just by providing resources for people. Apply for that money. And I believe that application process opens up every March. It didn't this year, again, because of the pandemic. And then so number 3, you can lobby the board of directors, who just so happens to be the city council and the mayor. And that's something that you can lobby for actually to get that changed. We need to change that. The city council, who are paid and backed by the Police Officer Association donations, should not be the board of directors for the CCPD. So we want to lobby the board of directors to divest more money from crime control measures and then to invest more money into crime prevention measures. And you can go to the next slide. All right, and so here's the CCPD proposed calendar for 2020. And it looks like the next meeting is gonna be on August 18th. Again, you can attend this virtually and you can sign up to speak, or you can attend in person. So they're gonna be talking at that meeting about the proposed budget for the next, I don't know, 10 years, I'm not sure, probably just for the next year. So we definitely want to make our voice heard at those meetings. So take note of that, and we'll have a link actually, again, at the end of the program. I just want to say one more thing. On that list of links that you're going to get, there is a link that goes directly to a meeting that was held in February where someone did come and make a public comment. And when you hear that public comment, you'll see just how important it is for us to show up and be at those meetings, because if we're not being heard, the only voice that's being heard is the ones that are saying to continue to bloat this fund and fund more policing in our marginalized neighborhoods.
Thank you so much, Pam. We are We have 30 minutes left in this webinar and so much more to talk to you about. And we want to make sure that when we're talking about divesting from police, we're not centering that conversation on police. We have to center that conversation on our communities. And so this next section is, if you could advance the slide, Zoe, please. This next section is just about how we can invest in our community. So if you could, in the chat or in the Facebook chat, tell me what makes you feel safe. When you think about an ideal city and a safe city, what makes you feel that way? Just put it in the chat. When I think about what makes me feel safe, it's like knowing my neighbors and, you know, some of the things Pam mentioned, my needs being met. Having enough food, being able to like go to a store near me. There are food deserts all over Fort Worth, you know. Feeling like I have access to justice, not just access to the resources, right? Like if something's wrong and I call the city, can I do anything about it? Does my city make it easy for me to access justice? It's really important. And then when we think about the things that make us feel safe, to also to recognize what's out of that list, you know, and what's not on that list a lot of times is police. Our safety is comprised of, you know, having healthcare and being able to get where we need to go in a timely fashion, and you know, in like an equitable fashion. Not fighting for resources, mental health care. Yes, that's a really important one. Gabriela, do you want to touch on that?
Yes. So when we're looking at a national statistic, we have the American population is 330 million people. And out of those 330 million, it's an estimated 66 million people in the country suffer from a type of mental disorder or mental illness. So in very simple numbers, that's like 1/5, so around 20% of the population. If we apply those statistics to the Fort Worth population as of right now, it's around 895,000, excuse me. So that would be around 179,000 people in Fort Worth who are affected in some type of fashion by a mental disorder or mental illness. Now, when we talk about numbers in regards to treatment, how much does it cost to treat a single person? The average is around $3,000. Now, it could vary, obviously, depending on each individual's mental health plan, their just medical care as an individual. And if we look at these numbers in regards to Fort Worth, like the grand scheme of it all, it's $537 million. But the thing is not to look at it as just money, because when we talk about money, everybody likes to question, well, where is this money going to come from? Who's going to provide for this? But that same mentality isn't used when it comes to the CCPD. Where is this $80 million coming from? Who's providing these $80 million? So if we change the narrative from looking at it as just money to looking at it as people, $80 million from the CCPD fund can treat 27,000 people in the city of Fort Worth. And that's in just 1 year. Just as a reminder, the CCPD fund is $80 million per year over the next 10 years. So in the grand scheme of things, over the next 10 years, with that money, instead of investing in an organization, the police, that does nothing really to help our communities, we could be treating 270,000 people. And like, it has a domino effect. So when you treat one person, you're treating the people next to them. So you're treating way more than what you're paying for, if we're going to be honest. And when we also talk about taking money, it's not only divesting from the police, because you have to invest in community resources. We can, like, units in particular that were mentioned before would be like the narcotics unit, which is $8 million. And if you look at it in numbers of people, that's 3,000 people that can be treated. The next highest number would be SWAT. So that's $2.8 million. That's almost 1,000 people. And the next one would be like police, which is that's around 900 people. The grand scheme of it all, it's $20 million. It's around 7,000 people. Like, it's an investment. And at the end of the day, it's not just those 7,000 people that are being treated individually. It could be their kids, it could be their spouses, anybody next to them. With that treatment, it's a domino effect.
Yes, you reach your whole community through that. Yes, and there are some comments in the Facebook chat about what makes us feel safe. Our needs being met, access to health care, community engaged in empowering and protecting its youth, youth development programs, livable wages, educational opportunities, business ownership, quality available resources that help with mental health, healthcare, education for children and adults when I don't have to fear police. Yes, high quality education. This is amazing. I love it. These are the things that make us feel safe. Nice. Can you tell us more about community needs?
Oh, yes, I can. All right, so first I'll start off with just giving some eyewitness statements on the reasons why we need these community leads and just how traumatizing the police having so much money can be to the Black community, from the youth to the elders. And I just have 3 incidents that are very recent. The first was July 3rd in Como, Texas, where the SWAT team decided to deploy their Rook in a Black community in the neighborhood, in which children witnessed, in which families were afraid, in which they in somewhat applied martial law. July 4th in Eastwood, Texas, in about a mile radius, there was about 21 units deployed. People couldn't even go to Family Dollar to get diapers without wondering what's going on. It just looked like a war zone, like a battle zone, very uncomfortable for people trying to live their everyday life. Very traumatic, definitely affects your mental health, especially with a child not understanding when mommy takes him to the store to buy snacks while there are 3 squad cars with lights blinking and SWAT team dressed in uniforms just standing there with nothing actually happened. And July 21st, when the SWAT team deployed the Rook again in Southwest Fort Worth. So with that, something that I've noticed even last night at a protest, the SWAT team decided to deploy at a protest with families, and I noticed a child, a young Black boy, and he was just crying, and he was actually absolutely terrified at just the sight of the police and how they were functioning. And I remember saying to someone there, like, that kid's gonna be affected for the rest of his life. Like, anytime he sees a man in uniform, he is gonna be absolutely terrified. Like, he saw them as the bad guy, as a villain in a Avengers movie. Like, that's how they come to our communities. They are like the villains in the eyes, and it's even noticeable by the children, to the point where in the Black community, not all, but some Black families can use, I'm gonna call the police on you, and it will bring terror to a child. So with that being said, we bring on to the mental health, and that is absolutely needed. Youth programs are absolutely needed, and I see that they do say they give some money to these youth programs, but how accessible are they? How well are they promoted? How open are they to the families to even know? You know,
and
what
also,
are the,
like, when they fund these programs, it's built that way, right? So like,
exactly,
so that you want to pass that money because you
exactly,
want to fund those programs. So that's not accidental, and we don't have to make that choice, you know. And yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
And one thing I know Pam's gonna touch on it, and it was something that myself and the EIE team have been going over, and that is a CAHOOTS program. We need a crisis center with the task force, and the good thing about that is in Fort Worth, we are already establishing the blueprint. We already are identifying staff members. We already have identified who will be our task force. Like, we have everything lined up to present to them. They just have to accept it. It will take a load off of them. It would put more money in the community. We can handle more mental health calls versus calling a police officer to an incident where it might be a traumatized 16-year-old living in a single parent home and he's arguing with his mom. We don't need the police to come there and take offense to this child being traumatized and having a mental problem and then using force to him, which leads to him going to juvenile jail and so forth. You know, the SRU, the school resource unit, we don't need police officers in schools. We need social workers, counselors, someone that can make a connection and be relatable to the children instead of always wanting to use force and continuing the school to prison pipeline. We want to get rid of all of that and get rid of it. some of the other money can be reinvested into trade school programs, actually building something in the Black community to build more careers, more things to be entrepreneurs, you know, respecting the Black businesses more and making it so that they're not just installing cameras to watch the neighborhood, but maybe they're fixing the parking lot so that Black businesses can look more approachable. Maybe they can beautify the area so that our Black businesses are stores that people want to go to instead of driving to another neighborhood and getting the same exact service just somewhere where it's more taken care of because the city gives them more money. Also, I believe we can invest in more of a ride-along program with just a group of volunteers that can actually build a schedule and go with some of these officers to kind of guide them through how to approach some citizens instead of always using training. Pull your taser, hand on your gun when you walk out the car. They're so robotic. They need someone to maybe assist them and to be more humane. So I think that would be something great. And the last thing I had was, let me just check, just more programs. You know, I can drive through some of the areas like Stop 6, Eastwood, Poly, Southside, Como, and there's no programs. There's really absolutely nothing. There's no swimming school camps. There's very little martial arts class. There's really nothing for our youth and children to engage in an intellectual level or just being able to be occupied besides having to be in these places that the police actually prowl and excessively police. Like, we definitely need more youth programs for adolescents as well, and just more programs for the Black life period, I guess we can say. Like, we need everything that you guys have in Ridgely Hills, North High Mount, Hewlin Bend, Fairmount, Wedgwood. We need the same things that you guys have in our neighborhood to just better us as a people so that we don't feel like that we do not deserve these things, because it's almost like we don't have the right to have these things in our neighborhoods. Like, you have to go take your Black dollar and spend it here because we haven't made your communities accessible or even built a blueprint, a platform to place those things there. So when it comes to this money, they can take that $10 million from the SRU and they can put it in our youth programs. They can build us a crisis center that mirrors the Cahoots program. They can just do a whole lot more and treat us with the same things that they're getting in other communities. So it's definitely all about reallocating that money and defunding the police and putting it somewhere that matters. It's not going to take away from the police. It's going to help them because we have what we need, so they're no longer needed. So I just think that we definitely need to figure out a way to reallocate that money and just better the communities here. And the police can be more available for real crimes instead of creating those crimes in our communities. So we can either defund the police or continue to subtract the Black lives. It's up to us.
Thank you so much. That was, you said it.
You're welcome.
We compiled some resources. So if you could just run through like the previous 3 slides, we're going to send out these slides. I think are in the link that we'll give to everyone at the end of the slideshow. And you'll be able to access like a list of resources in our community. We do make a difference in our community. This work is already going on here and we can prioritize it in our budget. Pam is gonna talk to us about making a difference in the budget. And yeah, I'm so excited to hear more.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Gabriella and Nice for that on alternatives. And I just want to make a note of those last few slides that we ran through about resources. Those are not an alternative to 911. They're not an alternative to emergency resources. That's what we lack. And so that's where something like Cahoots could come in and be a mental health first responder alternative that we sorely need. All right, so how can we make a difference in the budget moving forward? We are in budget season. Most cities around the nation are in budget season. And yes, you've already made a difference. Fort Worth, thank you for advancing that slide. You've already made a difference. Over 250 letters, guys, you in the community, sent these to city management and city council. And those letters had a detailed plan about what we wanted to see in participatory budgeting in the city of Fort Worth. In the recent past, we have not had participatory budgeting here in Fort Worth. That's where we've lagged behind. So we made our voices heard this year, and we are starting that process. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning. And hopefully it's just gonna get better and better each year. City government listened, and now we must hold them accountable to follow through. If you'll go to the next slide. This is the budget process that the city undertakes every year, okay, when they start talking about the budget. So you see that first column is city staff. Beginning in November of each year, they start looking at the prior year, and they start then looking to the next year. They have a council retreat in February where they do a lot of forecasting for the upcoming year. But if you look in the next two columns, city council and public. So in March, end of March, beginning of April, there are stakeholder meetings that happen. And these stakeholders are made up of members of the advisory committees. And if anyone attended those public budget meetings that David Cook presented, you heard him talking about that a lot of these funds and a lot of the city businesses, like the golf course, like the airports, and even some of the general fund expenditures departments have advisory committees. So those advisory committee people make up those stakeholders, and those stakeholders have a say early on, beginning in March, as to what their priorities are for the budget and what they think should be, in the budget. So we need to make sure that we're infiltrating those advisory committees for these funds. Please go back and watch those presentations that David Cook gave. There's a lot of good information in there. Again, we linked those tonight. And then you'll see the two places there with the star, public budget meetings. Those are the ones that David gave. So those are the ones that you all fought for and we got. Then the next one in August, it says meetings. What that should really say is virtual budget town halls, okay? That's where we have an opportunity to come, and we've already studied the budget, right? And how the budget works. On August 11th, David Cook, our city manager, is actually going to present the budget for 2021, all right, the new budget. And so we'll have an opportunity to look that over. That's next Tuesday. And then we'll come into those virtual budget town halls to give our feedback, to say, what we've been saying tonight, we need to take some of this money from the police budget and we need to move it over here. What is our housing budget looking like in the midst of a pandemic? What is our economic development budget looking like in the midst of a pandemic? So these are the things, that we can bring insight to, that folks who are working at the city government level may not be aware of. We're the people who are the recipients of these services. So who better to say where there are holes, where there is lack, and where there could be more funding. So this is a time for us to ask questions. If you go to the next slide. All right, and so this is just another look at a timeline. So you'll see virtual town hall meetings there in August and September. The date and the time are yet to be determined. And so when we say stay on your council members and hold them accountable, this is what we need to be holding them accountable for right now. They have yet to release dates for these virtual town halls. And I've actually heard some of the council members, or actually the city manager, referring to these as almost optional. We need to let them know these are not optional. They will be happening because we demanded them, and they're on this calendar, and we need to make sure that they happen, because that is where we have a say in our budget. And so it's not just a time for us to have a say, but it's time for us to get our questions answered. The city of Dallas had over 30 virtual and in-person budget town halls last year. People were able in the community to call in, ask questions, and get their questions answered on the spot, make suggestions, and get feedback on the spot. That is what we've asked for, and that's what we need to hold our city council accountable for. And then you'll see right after those virtual town halls, there are city council budget work sessions. These happen every year, and that's where the city council takes all of this feedback and they go and they have deliberations. These are open to the public. Okay, you can watch these online, or you can go to City Hall. There's no public comment, but you can hear what are the deliberations, what are they cutting, what are they adding, what feedback from the community are they taking into account. So that happens on those dates. And then in September, there are the public budget hearings. These are the things that have been happening every year, but most people don't know about them. And when they do utilize them, it's really pointless, because by that time, the budget is already set. So thank goodness this year we'll have public input before that time. But during those budget hearings, you can basically speak during the 7 p.m. city council meetings for 3 minutes and not get a response, but at least you can speak. And then right after that, the budget will be voted on. It'll be adopted. Probably on September 22nd, the city council will vote to adopt the new budget. And then that new budget will go into play on October 1st. So there are plenty of opportunities this year, thanks to you all's voice, to have a say in the city budget, to have a say in where your money goes. Again, this is our city and it is our budget. If you go to the next slide, you'll see contact information. Please contact your city council persons and your mayor. We have Twitter handles here. We have phone numbers. We have emails. Blow them up and say, one, thank you for the participatory budgeting thus far, but also we need to see you follow through. What are the dates for those virtual town halls? And then any questions that you may have about the budget. Go to the next slide, please. All right, and so, and this has been mentioned before, participatory budgeting in other cities. Dallas is doing an amazing job. As a matter of fact, what we're starting to do is really thanks to a lot of the guidance from them. Check out Our City, Our Future and In Defense of Black Lives Dallas on Facebook. And you can see what's going on this weekend. As a matter of fact, I'll be attending one of their community budget setting sessions where they're coming up with a people's budget. And that's something that we really want to work towards here in Fort Worth, possibly next year. And then Austin Justice Coalition, they're also doing a great job. They actually have champions for participatory budgeting on their city council. Greg Kassar, he's amazing. And he was on a recent webinar that Austin Justice Coalition did. And they're really pushing that. St. Louis closed the workhouse. Please check them out online and on Facebook. They actually just got a jail shut down in the city of St. Louis, a jail that you can look and see on their website about how problematic that jail had been for decades in their community. They got it shut down through a lot of hard work. And now they're looking to repurpose the millions, I believe it's like 16 million a year that was going to fund the workhouse. They're going to repurpose it to programs of community uplift. So that is a perfect example of what defund police means. Defund systems of incarceration means. It means investing in communities.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pam. on the next slide, there are the links for all of these like awesome programs that you've heard about tonight. Please interact with these resources. This community and everyone you heard from tonight put a lot of love into compiling them. And we want to respect your time. And we know that we're running up against the end of when we said this webinar would end. I think some of the panelists are going to stay on and do a little Q&A. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat or in the Facebook Live so that we can answer them for you. And if you're hopping off now, thank you so much for joining. Please remember to interact with these resources, get involved, talk to your council members. All of that information is in the resources, and that link is in the comments. Thank you so much. I'm gonna look for some questions and we'll transition into Q&A. If y'all wanna all just like come on camera and we can actually take the slideshow off and just riff a little bit and talk. We're like, you know, in this community, and I think that talking to our community is where our collective strengths are for sure. All right, let's look for some questions. How can we receive notification when the town hall dates are determined? There's lots of calendars on the city website that you can sign up for. It's a really easy process, and you can like click exactly which calendars you want notification for.
Also, please follow United Fort Worth on Facebook. We will be updating the community as to when those virtual town halls are going to be. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And United Fort Worth, all of the organizations, they're on like the second slide when you get the slideshow. Please follow all of those organizations. There's so much important work going on in Fort Worth. And being able to like stay in touch with it is really how we can affect collective change. What are they going to do when half of our city is evicted, when unemployment stops? Does anyone want to talk about evictions right now in Tarrant County and Fort Worth?
Yeah, so just in talking to folks who work at the Northwest Texas Legal Aid, they are volunteer attorneys who assist people with evictions. Right now, they are busier than they've ever been, ever in their careers. In my talking to them, people are getting eviction notices left and right. And so this is a real problem that really at this point, I'm really not sure how the city is planning on addressing it. We did petition the city. When we saw this problem on the horizon, we petitioned them to enact a grace period ordinance for renters of residential property as well as commercial property, but they refused. They refused to even put it on a voting agenda, while cities like Austin and Dallas put them on the agenda and passed them. San Marcos as well. San Antonio put it on their agenda, but it failed. So this is really a huge failure on the city of Fort Worth's part, that they have not put something into place, a social safety net for all of these evictions that they know are on the horizon. One way beyond the city level that we can begin, that we should begin to lobby and address, and people are already doing it. If you look to organizations like Texas Housers and Texas Tenants Union, they're addressing this on the state level, because what we really need is statewide legislation, so that we don't have piecemeal ordinances in different cities across the nation, across the state, but that we have a statewide law in place that protects people, you know, from being put out on the street, especially, you know, during times like these. But I think it's definitely not too late for people to continue to write letters, make phone calls, send emails to your city council, to your county commissioners, and to your state legislatures letting them know that we need protections for people from evictions.
Yes, absolutely. We are failing to like keep people safe in and when we're spending all of our public safety money in policing, for sure. Lizzie, I know you have lots of knowledge on evictions and wonderful framing. Do you have want to add here?
Yeah, I think that we are seeing like mass waves of either evictions or impending evictions that are coming soon. But something else I wanted to speak to is that through our like syringe access program in Fort Worth, we've been seeing really high reported rates of HIV, hepatitis C, and fatal overdoses in the community. There was also like a story released pretty early in the COVID crisis about how domestic violence and like child abuse were increasing because people were like stuck at home feeling really helpless, and kids didn't have anywhere else to go, people didn't have anywhere else to go, etc. So we're really not understanding like the full impact of this public health crisis on our communities. And if we don't take the time now to frame things this way, they will sell us that this is all crime, because like as soon as someone is evicted, they're no longer like a family that lost their housing because of this mass pandemic. They're people experiencing homelessness, and we've seen how really combative and hostile our community treats people experiencing homelessness. They're criminalized. That's a huge area of policing, is like issuing citations and arresting people for like loitering, sleeping in their cars, etc. And so as soon as those people become like houseless, they are extremely vulnerable to like interaction with the police state essentially. And like people who use drugs are already vulnerable with that interaction, but as services continue to like be depleted, Jen, you know, we saw that the county public health department like ceased all pop-up testing for STIs in the community during COVID. That's really difficult because people aren't really going into healthcare settings right now to like get routine preventative care testing, etc. So we're just beginning to see the impacts of this on our communities, and we really need to keep front of mind that like the people impacted by this are not criminals. They're not like other than us. They're us, and in the same economic situation we're in the same like, you know, this is a global crisis. It's hitting all of us in like different ways. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, thank you so much. This, like all of these systems are toxic and they work together. There's another question. I think we could talk about like that all for a long time, but there's another question. It's how can we improve the level of political education in working class communities? Chris, do you want to open up on this one?
That's quite a question. I appreciate you, Jen. I mean, honestly, I think it's all about organizing. We have to, you know, we have to talk and be in community with the people closest to us, you know, our neighbors, our coworkers, and we have to be then creating spaces, right, where we have these sorts of conversations, and not necessarily presentations, but literal just conversations. And we also have to give, you know, from our part, you know, give people opportunities to see success, right, to see change happen, and which really can be motivating to get involved and then stay involved. So. You know, knowing where opportunities lie, and then, you know, trying to get folks together to take advantage of those, really creates a momentum to bring more folks to the table, bring more folks in, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure that other folks here have some great answers to that, but that'd be my starting point.
I'm on mute. There are more questions. So I think that was a great answer. I think collective education and community education, and this question ties actually really well into our next question, which I would love it if Pam could start us off on. It's what are some steps we can take to continue budget conversations after the current budget cycle?
Yeah, and so thank you, Jen. Yeah, that was a little bit about what I was alluding to earlier, is that, you know, our neighbors to the east, Dallas, are doing a really great job of really involving the community, and they started quite early. We were kind of behind the 8 ball here in Fort Worth, but what we can do after this budget season is begin to work on next year's budget season and begin to work on really building a people's budget. And that's going to be really imperative moving forward, so that, you know, this year we can definitely participate and everyone can come with their own ideas. For sure, you can do that. But hopefully next year we can come with a unified voice, with an outline for what we want in a collective people's budget. And so that's going to mean having things like people's assemblies. Dallas is doing some of those this weekend, where it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an assembly of the people coming together to say, hey, these are the things that we want to see funded. These are the things that we prioritize. And then when those virtual town halls happen, virtual budget town halls happen that the city puts on, we can come with that agenda that we've put together, and we can lobby for it.
Yeah, I think that it's so important what you were just saying, that agenda that we've put together. It's so important that we spend time in community imagining what a future that was safe for Fort Worth could look like. And I think that those exercises and being together while we think about what we want for our community and our hopes and dreams, because our hopes and dreams for Fort Worth are different than, you know, what anyone else would experience in any other city. And so I think spending that time focusing on what we do want to fund is so important, because we have like so much money for the other, right? And so I'm really excited to continue these conversations on our various platforms. Fort Worth Futures is one. Also, it's a coalition of organizations working to just imagine a future for Fort Worth that is like beyond public safety, beyond policing. And so please follow us on Facebook and Texas Appleseed also. Let me see if we have any other questions. Is there any organized effort by Black Lives Matter, UFWT, or other orgs to get undocumented immigrants and the African American community educated on why it's important to complete the census? In order to not lose billions of dollars for the community and lose congressional representation, the deadline was pushed back to prevent people of color from being counted. You know, while I'm sure that's true, and the census and the American Community Survey, is that what it's called? I think it is, determine a lot of funding politically for our communities, it also ties into why these systems are toxic and why, like, you know, why do we do the census and then still have gerrymandered maps, you know, like why are these things working together? So while people participating in the census is of importance, it's also a piece of a system in which it's not, you know, it's not educating the Black community, right? Like, why is the onus on the Black community and on immigrants to like take the foot off of their neck, you know? And I think that that's an important question to ask in response to that question. Of course, the census is important and education around it is important, but people their needs aren't met. So the census isn't, you know, like people's needs aren't met, and we have this data. And so, yeah, I think that we can hold both of those things. We can say, yes, participate in the census, and we can also admit that like the census ain't everything.
I did the census and there were no questions about whether or not my needs were being met on the census. It was just demographic data.
Jen, to your point, like in terms of like the census, and also to the earlier question just about like political education, I believe organize is the key for political education. But also we have to redefine what we mean by political education. So part of it is understanding political processes. Like Pam and others on here have like done a really great job of describing in terms of how the system works. Because one thing that I want everybody to take away from this conversation is the fact that knowledge of these systems is important, and the fact that oftentimes we haven't been included because of lack of knowledge about how those processes work, and there's not a sense of accountability and transparency for us to be involved with them. But the other part is to work outside of the system as well too. So political education isn't just learning about the system and how it works, because if we just work within the system, there's no way we're going to actually be able to transform that system, because the system was never created for us. And that's like me speaking as an abolitionist. I'm like, one of the key things that I stand on no matter what is that anytime we're trying to make transformative changes in our society, working the system and the things that we currently have using those measures are good. And I don't want to understate the involvement in those things. But at the same time, we also have to be able to say the work that you are doing, Jen, and the work that you are doing, Lizzie, within your communities in terms of like transforming the way people think about different issues like drugs, addiction, all those different, birth control, all those different things, like being able to have education on those things, more like to my like own things that I work with, conception of like trans and queer people, conceptions of prisons and how our community serves as prisons in and of themselves, our understanding of policing, like policing isn't just a person, policing is like the Becky down the street, like it's not just Becky, Becky's friends too, like, but all those different things, we've got to have like, political education is an entire process, and it's not limited to just the political process. That is important, but that's not going to be the thing that creates the transformative changes that we need. It's us and what we built together as a community.
Yes, absolutely, Richard. Thank you. That was like the framing. That's it right there. Lizzie, I got one for you. What role can young people who are committed to being empowered play in the police divestment movement? Are the kids all right?
Get them out of schools. But go with it, Lizzie. You got it.
Yeah, I definitely think one of the first ways that I would love to see like young folks get super involved if they aren't already, which I don't want to erase the fact that these movements are participated in and led by young people, that this isn't like, I listened to Michelle Obama's podcast and I was pretty put off by the fact that she was inferring that like young people are not involved because there's no hashtag for voting or that sort of thing. Young people are so involved in these movements. We meet young people every day. Yeah, and I would love to follow the leadership of young people rather than tell them what to do. But one thing I would love to see young people doing, if they aren't already plugged in, is demanding safe schools right now. Your school district is responding to whether you're in like, if you're in the public school district, at least like K through 12 or whatever, your school district and even your university and your college are answering to like a number of different stakeholders, community folks, students, but minimally students, parents, donors, investors, funders, etc., like politicians and all of those people. You definitely have a right to make your voice heard about what kind of conditions you want to return to school in, and I hope that you do that. No one should be able to make you go back before it's safe to be back, and for parents that are eager for schools to reopen right now because of work schedules and need and that sort of thing, I hope that we have like the knowledge and the wisdom to know that like we don't need to demand that our schools reopen early. We need to demand stimulus. We need to demand like rent and mortgage forbearance and forgiveness, and living wages and paid time off, paid sick time, etc. Like these are the things that will actually keep us safe through this pandemic, not just opening schools and sacrificing 3% or more of the population. I know my son's school is like a petri dish. He like comes home every day with something new and we all get it and we circulate it around the house and whatever. I don't want to see families, you know, being kind of like harmed. Yeah, exactly. By that.
Chris, you're next. What are some easy key points or major takeaways that can be used when advocating to policymakers so they understand our mission to divest from policing and invest into our communities?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's there are better ways to address the problems that we have in our community. And right now, we're not only not investing in those things, we're taking that money and putting it into a system that that is actually causing harm, right? So this is as much about creating opportunities for us to actually have health and safety in our communities, as it is about police. I think someone said it earlier. This is more about us in the community than it is about the police. And so it's really just about really investing in communities to have alternative approaches to health and safety that actually work and meet our needs, and don't rob from those approaches by putting it into stuff that actually can cause us harm.
And that was a great answer, Chris. We have one last question, and I think we'll just popcorn style it, and we'll call it done for the evening. This question is, how do we empower the community to take advantage of change when it comes? How do we empower the community to take advantage of change when it comes? Change comes at us every day in so many ways, especially in this world and in this time. And I think that like being responsive to those changes and taking the space to know that this system is functioning exactly how it was made to function, and to know that we can think past that, right? We have the imagination and collective power to think past that. And using that collective power to just like seize the changes and remember that we fund this city. So like, it's not like we fund this city and they get to make all the decisions for us. Like that is not the way that this system was meant to happen. And the fact that it's happening that way is pure corruption. And so like being able to hold that and use that as framing, and as we move into like learning more about this work, is one way we can take advantage of change when it comes. And I will pass to Pam.
Yeah, ditto to everything you said. I don't really have much to add to that. I think everybody just really becoming self-empowered. And I say that to mean realize that you do have power. Your voice is powerful. And that when you educate yourself, which I know can be daunting and scary sometimes, you become even more powerful. So just keeping it real simple, I think the question was, how can we empower people to get engaged when change comes? Learn about those changes, go to the meetings. Most of the meetings are online. So if you're working, you can watch them later, but watch them later and learn what just happened in your city and what you can do to change it, if you don't like it. This is representative government. Call your representative. Tell them what you think about how they voted or about how you think they should vote. They want to hear from you. And if they don't, vote them out. So be self-empowered. Understand that you hold the power to make your city whatever you want it to be. And again, that doesn't happen overnight and doesn't happen alone, but it does happen the more and more we each become educated and engaged in the process.
And who do you want to pass to?
I will pass to, who's left? Richard.
Honestly, y'all have all said it pretty much better than I can say it for sure, but just actively stay engaged. Stay engaged with the things going on in the communities. But another thing is like, empower yourselves by empowering your own community. And that just means talking to your neighbor. So if you're gonna vote some way, and voting is the way you choose to make that change, talk to your neighbor and say, hey, how do you feel about this issue? Let's talk about it. So that's kind of my solution, is just kind of like building with the people around you.
And who do you want to pass to?
All right.
Chris or Liz?
Is Night still on?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay. I can't see anybody on my thing. Okay.
Oh, it's
I'll
just
go to,
Chris
I'll pass to
and
Lizzie.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, I love what y'all are saying. And also, I'm like a big fan of mutual aid projects and like resource redistribution. So the way that I respond to change, at least, is like when Jen's organization, Rebirth, and like the ODA found out that the county public health department wasn't going to be doing STI testing, we just got our hands on several hundred HIV, rapid response HIV and Hep C tests, and we like set up places and promoted that we were going to be there and let people know that they could come and get a free test, basically. So recognizing like when you have connections, privilege, like a platform, whatever is in your like wheelhouse, basically, to like put towards change also, or to respond to crisis. I'm a big fan of like using that to redistribute resources and also like advocate for change at the system level as you kind of have power to do that. But something that I always do, at least as an exercise, whenever like a change happens and I'm like, how is this going to affect my community, which right now is like my organizing community, my family, people who use drugs, like people involved in political work in the area or whatever. If I find that one of my communities is going to be like affected by a change that just happened, I will do like a pod map, basically, or like a power map of like what's in my corner, what kind of resources I have, who like I might be able to influence, who I might like, whose mind can I change on this issue, basically, and whose mind do I need to be changed on this issue in order for like change to happen. So this is like you're seeing the results of power mapping that has already gone on, actually, and what Pam's showing you through like participatory budgeting demands and the local efforts that way. That all started with like understanding who has the power to make the decision, how do we make like their minds and hearts changed, basically, in this process, and like what's our timeline to work with. Do that same exercise when you're being affected by change, or when you're like being impacted emotionally by change or whatever. Do a power map of like who's on your side, who have you seen with influence that also agrees. We're also pushing for like a public defender's office in Tarrant County, where we're the largest county in the country without one. And so that all started with a power map as well, like who can we influence? Yeah, exactly.
We got that in Austin last
I'm
year.
gonna pass to you now, Chris. Anyways, I've been talking for too long.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. But no, we just got that last year in Austin. That was a rough campaign. So anyway, I'm happy somebody replaced us, but I'm sad as y'all. Let me know if I can help. No, I mean, I think, you know, what this moment has shown me, you know, is that there's a lot of change that's possible, no matter who's in power, right in the moment, when people take to the streets and do a lot of work, right? So many things have changed. That said, you know, the power structure will always veer towards the symbolic, right, and never towards the real resource allocation and moving things around. And so I agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said, and also in terms of using your own power and your own community's power to do mutual aid and other things to move resources around. But ultimately, if you're trying to change policies at city, state, county, whatever, you need places at the table, and you get places at the table by being organized. You know, people of prominence who generally are at these tables have at some point in the past usually shown some ability to organize people. And if you want to meet with anyone in the power structure, it typically comes by virtue of you being involved in a group, whether it's a group that already exists or you're going to start your own thing. But being organized is how you take advantage and be ready, because you can have different people looking at different things, staying on top of this. Like we can't, any of us know everything about the city, you know. But if I know a little bit and you know a little bit, you know a little bit, together, our knowledge is such that we can know everything, right? So that's what I'd say.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much. We're going to close out. Please keep the conversation going in the chat on the Texas Appleseed page, Facebook Live. We'll go in there and answer questions too. We love talking about this stuff with your community. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been a really great conversation. Thank you to all the panelists, especially the ones that hopped off. I hope that they get my thank you. And to Texas Appleseed, Christian, thank you so much for your like logistical prowess in organizing. Thank you so much, y'all. Have a great night.
Thank you for hosting, Jen.